What's up, ladies and gentlemen? This week we are going to get spooky. We are going to continue our October. We are going to talk about Ruth and Musick and the Telltale Lilac Bush. So, a few weekends ago, it was around the 1st of October, they had this big press event for Fallout 76 at the Greenbrier. And during that time, one of the members of the press that was there for it commented on Twitter that he thought his room was haunted, in which I informed him the entire state is haunted. We've talked about the penitentiary, we've talked about the Trans-Allegheny, but I don't think anything quite sums up how haunted West Virginia is like the Telltale Lilac Bush. And I don't know what it is about this book, but every fall I'm compelled to read it. I don't know what it is. Something about it. I don't know if it's October, I want something fun and Halloween-esque to do. I don't know what it is, but something about this book reminds me. I have no idea why this book reminds me of the fall. And just looking at this book, you know it's going to be good. It has a Skeletoman on it, which is like the universal code for things are about ready to get creepy. So before we talk about the book, let's take a little bit of time to talk about Ruth and Musick. She wasn't a native West Virginian, but I can't think of anyone that would say she wasn't a West Virginian. She moved here from Missouri and taught English. She was an English professor at Fairmont College, which is now Fairmont State University. Probably as iconic as her literature is her brother Archie Musick's illustrations that he did for her. I'll stick some pictures in this area. There's actually two major murals on the grounds of Fairmont State University that were inspired by his works. She had three major works published in her lifetime. The first one was Ballads, Folk Songs, and Folk Tales from West Virginia, which was published in 1960. Her second work was Telltale Lilac Bush and Other West Virginia Ghost Tales, which was published in 1965, followed by Green Hills of Magic, West Virginia Folk Tales from Europe in 1970, and after her death, Coffin Hollow and Other Ghost Tales was finally published in 1977. Ruth Ann unfortunately passed away in 1974. Telltale Lilac Bush is a 160 page collection of over 100 ghost stories collected by her and her students at the time from individuals living in north central West Virginia. It's a fascinating book. There are so many different sections, and there's little bits of history sprinkled throughout. I think one of the main reasons why West Virginia is presumed to be haunted is due to the fact that, West Virginia has a long history of just hard and dangerous working conditions. The state was basically built upon the coal industry, the railroad, and the timber industry, which are all three very dangerous jobs. And these individuals were working, very close proximity to each other. It was for radio and television. So one of the main ways they entertained each other was through stories. And predominantly, many of those were probably ghost stories. The other fact is West Virginia at this point was a massive melting pot. You had recent immigrants from Europe, mainly Italians, Hungarians, Russians, that were moving into these coal towns because of the relative abundance of jobs. There are several sections in the book. You have wives who returned, you have headless ghosts, you have haunted places, you have ghostly children, you have coal mine ghost stories, railroad ghost stories, murdered kinsmen, and weird creatures. And I think there should be a section of just skeleton shenanigans, because there's some great stories in here that are just about skeletons doing skeleton things. Skeletons are kind of jerks. For example, the cover story, the Telltale Lilac Bush, is about a guy whose wife went missing. One night, they're having to get together on the front porch, and without any wind, this tree just starts bashing against a house. The guy starts acting really weird, and they run out and they dig up the tree, and they find a hand bones, and they deduce that it belonged to his wife and that he killed her. There's another one about a guy who one night, kind of goes down to, they moved in, I believe they moved into a new house, and he goes down into the kitchen to just have a piece of pie, and all of a sudden this skeletal hand comes out and cuts a piece of pie and just slowly takes away. Like, what's a skeleton gonna do with a piece of pie? You don't have a mouth. You don't have a stomach. Like, what is a skeleton gonna do with a piece of pie? Like the story of the little rag doll is a story that you've heard probably 100 different variations of someone sees a ghost, they give a ghost something without knowing it's a ghost, and then later on that item, they're just walking through and that item is on the grave of the ghost. It's fairly common urban legend, and here it is in a book that was written in the 1960s. The story was originally recorded in the 1940s. It was published in the 1960s. It was recorded in the 1940s from someone that heard it from their mother, that heard it from their mother. And I'm sure that wasn't the original iteration of the story either. You see how these little bits of folklore kind of get passed down. It's like a big game of telephone. And then it affects, urban legends and stuff to this day. One of my favorite stories in here, well, not favorite, but stories I laughed at while reading, if you know who Doot is, the trumpet playing skull, there's a story in here about a boy that wanted to learn how to play trumpet. And again, this is another skeletal shenanigan story. He wants to learn how to play trumpet. His parents are like, no, just no. And somehow the boy dies, and the skeleton appears and is like, well, you wouldn't let your son learn how to play trumpet, so now I'm just gonna haunt you guys and play trumpet. Like, skeleton, how are you playing? You don't have lungs, you don't have lips, you don't have the arm muscles necessary to hold up a trumpet. Like, why are you giving these people a hard time? You are a skeleton. You could have a very successful music career because people would be like, how are you doing that? People would pay good money to see that. Why are you haunting these people? I think they end up going insane. And being from north central West Virginia, a lot of these ghost stories, you look up where they take place and you know exactly where that is. For example, there is a ghost story that literally takes place within like a couple minutes of where this friend of mine lives. There's a story in here about a guy that killed another guy with a scythe, and he threw the guy's head in a well. No, the guy's head fell in a well. And then he buried the body. And this friend of mine had told me several times before I went back through and read the book that his house was haunted. And I was like, okay, whatever. This story takes place pretty close to his house. And what else is cool about this is there's all these little citations in the back of the book that tell you, like, where the story's from, if there's any historical relevance to it, if there's any ghost story tropes that go along with it. And, like, when you look up that one, it was told by Robert Lieber of Fairmont in 1954, as told to him by his mother. And then it says, the Scythe murder actually happened. Sorry to hear about your ghost problem, man. I don't know what to tell you. Definitely check out this book. You can get new copies of it. I think it's between like 10 and 15. Used copies online. I've seen them as low as like 6 to 8. Definitely, if you just love ghost stories or want to learn more about West Virginia, check this book out. Try not to be chased around by skeletons. That seems to be fairly common. They are just full of shenanigans. So try to stay away from skeletons. And don't forget to stay wild, and stay wonderful, and stay spooky. Welcome to West Virginia.